We offer, Lynn and I offer now some words of meditation. Lynn and I will offer some words of meditation for us now. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness.
By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, are we separated from one another and divided within ourselves.
Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all.
We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have gone before us.
We would hold fast to all of good we inherit, even as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false.
We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fancy.
Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, violence, and injustice.
Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that has shone in the lives of the greatest of men and women, the rays of whose lamps still illumine our way.
In this spirit we gather. In this spirit we pray.
No virtuous act is quite as virtuous.
Lynn, I think that's for the benediction at the very
end. I skipped a page. Apologize.
That's fine. That's fine. Right, I think we're going right now to our first hymn, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire.
Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, but have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. I may give all I possess and striving soul my love profess, but not be given by love within. The prophet soon turns strangely thin.
As we begin to absorb Reverend Ned's words today on reconciliation and restoration. I am grateful for our congregation's meditations on restorative justice over the years, and for what we will reflect on today with Reverend Ned Wight. If you feel a similar kind of gratitude for this kind of learning and meditation, please consider contributing to our virtual plate today. The link can be found in the chat box, and it will take you directly to the donation location. During the musical interlude, we hope we will receive our morning offering, which helps sustain our fellowship. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to play the Consolation of Liszt, which was the prelude for the offertory, and then I was asked to play the intermezzo for the postlude, and so we can have two pieces of music today. So this is a wonderful calming piece. I hope it has adheres to the theme for the service today. Thank you.
well worth waiting for. Thank you so much. Well, we have been at this nation building for a relatively short time, just over 240 years. Then in 2020, COVID-19 called a timeout, and we had a chance to take a hard look at the ways in which we have not always advanced the welfare of all of our citizens fairly and equitably. Many have been asking disturbing questions about our criminal justice system. Despite justice being in the name, it seems to be interwoven with racial inequity, corporate profiteering, chronic damage to families and children, indifference to victims of crime. At the same time, we're faced with a chronic problem in our own Unitarian Universalist congregations. We don't have great ways of managing interpersonal conflict and incidents when members hurt each other. And as a result, the hurt can fester for years. I'd like to propose today that our UU principles and theology encourage us to consider a different way of dealing with conflict and crises, an approach based on restorative justice in place of the retributive justice that dominates our larger culture. Retributive culture, as you may know, describes the system that allows wronged individuals to accuse, convict, and ensure the punishment of those who have wronged them. An eye for an eye and a tooth, for example. The focus is on the perpetrator, who in our criminal justice system is treated as a transgressor against the state. Too often, the victim of the crime is more or less ignored. In addition, the perpetrator's family and community have virtually no role to play in the process of seeking justice. And the outcome is most often punishment, incarceration, and separation from the community. Restorative justice, on the other hand, describes systems that enable wrongdoers and those whom they have wronged to participate in a process that invites repair of broken relationships and reintegration of the wrongdoers into the community. So retributive justice focuses on punishment for breaking the law. Restorative justice focuses on repairing and restoring broken relationships. That's one reason why a growing number of UU leaders are taking a close look at restorative justice and restorative practices, ways of dealing with misconduct or hurtful behavior that put relationships first, starting with the premise that human beings are part of a web of relationship, dare I say, the interdependent web, that are worth trying to restore when they get damaged or broken. You'll notice that I snuck our 7th UU principle in there, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And I could also have snuck in our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our second and third principles as well: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and acceptance of one another, and encouragement of spiritual growth in our congregations. Not to mention a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, principle number 5. In fact, these 5 principles speak directly to the values that undergird restorative practices: interdependence, personal worth and dignity, justice and compassion, acceptance and commitment to spiritual growth, and search for truth. No wonder there's a growing interest in restorative practices among UU leaders and congregations. They seem tailor-made for us. And what's at stake if we persist with retribution rather than restoration? Well, consider this incident from a UU congregation. A dispute developed within the membership of a committee about leadership succession. In one very painful session, a member of the committee said some caustic and hurtful things to other members, impugning their motives, their honesty, and their integrity. They were very, very upset. That member subsequently resigned from the committee and soon thereafter withdrew from active participation in the congregation. Nearly everyone on the committee felt relieved, but what were the short and long-term consequences of not having a pathway to try to restore the fractured relationships? and to move to some sort of reconciliation, both within the committee and within the larger congregation. The consequences are that both individuals and the larger congregation have little option but to cling to old hurts, grudges, and wrongs in their destructive aftermath. Everyone is on their own to do the best they can to come to terms with broken relationships, little or no chance for repair, and no pathway for restoration. Now, it is true that forgiveness and reconciliation can't be coerced or forced upon people, but it's just as true that without systems that invite people to consider the possibility of reconciliation, injured parties and those responsible for the injuries will never learn to what degree some sort of reconciliation might actually be possible. The price of living with hurt, anger, and blame on the one hand, or guilt, punishment, and ostracism on the other is high. And we all pay that price. The price is paid by individuals who may still have considerable skills, talents, and wisdom to share with us, but are expelled from the congregation. And the price is paid by the congregation that stays stuck and unable to move forward to fulfill their mission as a worshiping, loving, and serving body, just like the citizens of Grudgeville. But don't take my word for it. Consider where some of our UU theological sources point us with regard to our calling to reconciliation. You will recall that we have 6 sources that immediately follow the list of our 7 principles. The first source in that list is direct experience of mystery and wonder. If we have ever received a word or gesture of forgiveness from someone we have injured, we know what a balm that can be to our souls and what a chance that can give us to move forward with our lives. If we have ever offered a gesture or word of forgiveness or sought out an estranged person to see if we could invite them towards some kind of reconciliation, we know what a miracle of grace that can seem, filling us with wonder and joy. Our human capacity for empathy and the humility that comes from admitting our own imperfections point us toward forgiveness and reconciliation. The second source is words and deeds of prophetic women and men. Seems to me that 2 figures emerge from recent world history as exemplars of restorative practices. Former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and Chair of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Bishop Desmond Tutu. Mandela refused to pursue a course of vengeance and retribution following decades of torture and imprisonment and widespread abuses against Black people under apartheid. His example and the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, documented with such power in Bishop Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness, testify eloquently to the transformative power of forgiveness and reconciliation. Or consider our fourth source, Jewish and Christian teachings. Both Unitarianism and Universalism have their roots in Christianity, just as Christianity has its roots in Judaism. Having grown up in Congregational and Methodist churches, I learned early on what a central place love and forgiveness occupy in Bible stories. In the book of Jonah, for example, in Hebrew scriptures, God forgives the entire city of Nineveh when the citizens respond to Jonah's call for repentance. In the New Testament, Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, asking God to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And later in the book of Matthew, then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you 70 times 7. And what about the 6th source, earth-centered traditions? It turns out that indigenous cultures have deep experience with restorative practices. In Bone to Pick, journalist Ellis Close writes about the New England Juvenile Justice System's Family Group Conference, a practice inspired by the indigenous Maori people. It draws together family members, a policeman, the victim, a social worker, a youth advocate, and others to sit with the offender in a circle and devise a plan to keep the young person from offending again. In addition to accepting responsibility for what he or she has done and perhaps performing community service, the young lawbreaker is also expected to provide restitution. He also describes peacemaking circles, adapted in part from Canadian Aboriginal culture, which provides the context for people to listen to one another deeply, describe their wounds and hurts as the first steps in a process of reconciliation. So wisdom from all these sources call into question our reliance on legalistic, retributive, and punitive responses to wrongdoing within Unitarian Universalism. What would happen if we allowed this wisdom to inspire us to cultivate a new kind of UU culture, one that put the highest priority on truth-telling, forgiveness, and reconciliation? That's truth-telling, the act of publicly admitting that we've done wrong whenever we violate a commitment or covenant or law or hurt. Forgiveness is an openness to accept that public expression of remorse and to consider giving the person or persons a second or third or 70th chance to apologize, make amends, and restore broken relationships. And reconciliation is an invitation to move through a process that allows for the eventual restoration of the bonds that constitute our communities when those bonds have been torn apart. What makes me think that restorative justice might make a difference to our congregations and ourselves? Well, consider this morning testimony from a community that has put it to the test in the real world. This is contained in a 34-minute film entitled Burning Bridges, produced by the International Institute for Restorative Practices based in Canada. It's an organization dedicated to education, research, and intervention involving restorative justice. Here is the story. In 2004, 6 young men in their early 20s decided it would be a cool prank to set fire to an historic wooden covered bridge in a small town in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. In a mighty conflagration, endangering firefighters and bystanders, the historic bridge was completely destroyed. It was a thoughtless act that devastated members of the community who revered their past and regarded the bridge as a symbol of what was good about living there. Now, one of the staff members of the International Institute was from that part of Bucks County, and he asked if the community would be interested in having them conduct a restorative justice process with the young men, their families, and community leaders. The Institute interviewed all the participants individually or with their parents and asked them the following questions. What happened? What were you thinking about at that time, and what have you thought about since? How have you and other people been affected by what happened? What can be done to make things right? After all these individual meetings, the leaders brought more than 20 of them together in a restorative justice conference. The leaders asked people the same question, only this time, the perpetrators and the victims were in the same room and had to listen attentively to one another as each person spoke. It was obviously a painful and difficult process for most of the participants. The young perpetrators admitted they had not thought things through and offered painful expressions of remorse and regret. Their parents tearfully expressed disappointment, emotional pain, and concern for their children. Community members expressed grief and loss, anger, and bafflement about why these boys, whom they thought they knew, did this terrible act. And finally, hope that some way forward could be found that would hold them accountable for their wrongdoing, but would not destroy their lives. The outcome of the conference was a deeper understanding all the way around about the painful consequences of this impulsive act of arson. Excerpts of the conference were shown at the young men's trial and had some impact on their sentences. In addition to some time in jail, they were required to pay restitution of tens of thousands of dollars and to do 1,000 hours of community service. Most of the perpetrators ultimately were part of the labor crew that rebuilt the bridge and were present for the ribbon cutting when it was finished. Some of them still live in the same community, an outcome that would have been unthinkable had the community response been retributive rather than restorative. The story tells us that restorative justice can work to help bring estranged people back together. Suppose the UU congregation I mentioned earlier in the sermon made its own commitment to reconciliation and developed its own truth and reconciliation process. After the passage of enough time to let tempers cool, both the committee member who left the congregation and those on the committee whom he had verbally injured could present their versions of the story, their hurts and their aspirations to the listening group. That group would identify the factors pointing toward or mitigating against the possibility of reconciliation, and they would design a process to engage all of the principals in moving along that path. There's no guarantee, of course, of reconciliation, but the community would be playing an active role to facilitate the possibility, at least. There's a growing awareness among UU leaders of the power of restorative practices, and from time to time, members of regional staff conduct workshops where they introduce a range of restorative practices, including community circles, peace circles, restorative justice conferences. To become the powerful religious movement that we aspire to become, I believe we need to conduct a thorough inventory of our thinking and practices regarding misconduct, wrongdoing, and the ways we might hurt one another in light of our theological convictions. We need to renew our commitment to chart a countercultural course for our people, our congregations, and our religious movement, one that harnesses the transformative power of love expressed through truth-telling, remorse, reparations, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Restorative justice is the UU way to establish and preserve this sort of human community to which our faith calls us. This may seem like a daunting challenge, but it is also an exciting opportunity. And I believe this is the path we must follow if we hope to fulfill the promise of our transformational faith. So may it always be. Shalom, blessed be Insha'Allah, Aho, Shanti, Amen. Our closing hymn, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of living love, where people grow forgiving and forgiving. Break not the circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Come wander at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
Now Ned and I will be doing a responsive reading, closing words of Reinhold Niebuhr. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime.
Therefore, we are saved by hope.
Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history.
Therefore, we are saved by faith.
Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone.
Therefore, we are saved by love.
No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as from our own.
Therefore, we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness.
So I'm going to just ask if Karen wanted to play her second piece now, or if we should do the closing circle song. I would say let's have Karen play. Okay.
This next piece is an intermezzo by Dvorak. I had a student from Iraq who was in her high school when it was being bombed, and she was playing music, and it really was calming for her to go to music in the light of all the trouble she was experiencing. And this piece particularly meant a lot to her. And she played it this summer in Italy in my festival. So.
And now our closing circle song.
Lord.